Hello everyone and welcome to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And our article is going to be a bit about CPR.
Okay.
Not about doing it, but about one of the things you need to do it.
I
and
see.
The story behind it.
Okay.
Do you know CPR? Have you ever had training?
Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I did learn CPR, I guess basic CPR, when I was learning how to swim as a kid. And we would have a few refresher courses. I think I can probably remember most of it. Tip the head, look for obstructions, breathe in a couple times. I know that you should sing the disco song Staying Alive. That's a good rhythm to keep when you're doing the chest compressions.
Did not know that.
So yeah, I think I could, I mean, if I saw a situation, I could jump in. Now, am I good enough to teach doctors and nurses? No, absolutely not. I've never used it in real life, but I did learn as a kid. I'm sure you did too.
A few things. I can sort of remember the recovery position, but
okay, that's another good one.
I'd almost worry at this point my lack of recent knowledge on it. I'd be more likely to hurt somebody than help them, but yeah, I would want to have a refresher course.
I think maybe like you, I would do what I know while yelling, "Get a doctor! Get a doctor!"
Ambulance.
Because I would try to do my best, but of course not as good as a really well-trained person.
Okay, well, for training, you need a particular kind of, or a piece of equipment. You need the doll that you practice on.
Right.
And that's what we're going to be learning about today. Let's check it out.
Reading.
How a 19th century Parisian girl continues to save lives. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, is one of those skills we should probably all learn. This article isn't going to be about performing CPR, though. Instead, we'll look at the history of the common CPR doll, Resusci-Anne. Resusci-Anne's story starts in the 19th century. According to the story, a young girl was found drowned in the Seine River in Paris. Her body was taken to the city morgue to be identified by the public. However, no one could recognize her. A worker at the morgue was moved by the young girl's face, so he ordered a cast to be made of it. The mask became popular and was copied many times. In the late 1950s, Norwegian toy maker Asmund Lerdahl was asked to produce a medical doll for practicing CPR on. Lerdahl didn't know what kind of face to use for the doll. In the end, he decided to use the face of the Parisian girl for her calm expression. Her face has been used ever since.
So the article begins by saying cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, is one of those skills we should probably all learn. Yeah, it is useful. You never know when you might need to try and save someone's life. They've collapsed, they can't breathe. You might need to get them breathing again around beaches, swimming pools, or just on the street. It's like when you see the AED, those devices for starting people's heart. It's these, like, you could, just because you're the closest person, save someone's life or keep them alive so an expert can arrive. That's the idea here.
Absolutely. It's useful to learn first aid, which is basically doing things to stop people from dying right at a very important moment. It's good to learn all of those things, but if you're going to learn one thing, learn CPR, because that name tells you kind of how important it is. Cardiopulmonary. This is basically the scientific way of saying the heart and the lungs. These are things that really keep us alive. So you definitely want to be able to give someone CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, to stop them from dying. I mean, this is how important it can be. But as we read on, we find out, no, we're not going to be learning how to do CPR. You can sign up for a course or learn about that at school from people with good training. It says this article, isn't going to be about performing CPR though. So it's not an instructional or educational article about performing CPR. We're going to be looking at it from another angle. But here we have this verb to perform. When we hear perform, we often think of performers, people doing artistic activities, dancers, actors, singers, people like that, doing things on stage for an audience. And of course, that is one form of the word perform, but we can use it in a bigger way to talk about just doing an action or an activity, something that might be a little bit complicated. To perform this action well, you might need to learn or train or practice. So we often use this term actually when talking about doctors, when we talk about surgery, when doctors do those complicated things where they go in your body and fix things that aren't right. This is a good verb to use. The doctor performed surgery on the patient, and then later on the patient got better. So to perform could be to do some complicated singing and dancing activity, but also many other activities that might require some training and practice. For example, after breaking his leg, Jerry was unable to perform his duties as a soldier. All the different complicated things that soldiers need to do, he couldn't do them.
Okay, so we're not going to teach you CPR today. No. What are we going to do? Well, instead, the article says, we'll look at the history of the common CPR doll, Resusci Ann. That's her name. Yeah, Resusci would come from resuscitation, the bringing people kind of starting the breathing again, and her name is Anne.
Okay, so let's get back to the article and meet Resusci Ann. Where exactly does she come in to this story about CPR? Well, it says Resusci Ann's story starts in the 19th century. This is when she kind of became important and why we have this connection to CPR. But it actually came about in kind of a sad way, didn't it?
It is. The article goes on, according to the story, a young girl was found drowned in the Seine River in Paris. Wow. Of course, that's in France. And this girl was drowned. Here we're using the word as an adjective with the ed on the end, drowned. Of course, there's the verb to drown. If you've drowned, you've died because you couldn't breathe air. You just were in the water, you drank in the water, there was no air, and you died. So we could say a drowned person, a drowned body, drowned animals, or we could say that person drowned, which is the verb. Here's another example as an adjective. Several drowned sailors were found after their boat sank in a storm.
Oh, again, very sad. So yes, basically if you die in the water because you breathe in the water and you're not a fish, you're not Aquaman, you will drown. And of course, this is very bad and sad. In this case, this young girl drowned in the river, I guess right in the middle of the city of Paris, because the Seine River goes through Paris. And then what happened? Well, we read her body was taken to the city morgue to be identified by the public. Wow, so I guess the police didn't know who this person was. They didn't have any wallet or ID or a name on their clothes. There was no way for the police to know. So they took her body to the city morgue to be identified by the public. The morgue being a place in a city built by the city for people to, put bodies in. We're going to find out right now. So yes, a morgue is a place usually built by the city, usually filled with doctors, maybe even some police officers possibly. This is where they bring bodies after they've died in an accident or something like that. If it's a murder case, the police might investigate the body to see if they can find clues about how the person died or who killed the person. So this is a place where bodies are sort of handled and taken care of. Now, it's not the place where you might go with your poor grandma after she dies or something like that. That might be a funeral home. The morgue is more for the city workers to do investigations, to keep bodies safe before they can give the bodies back to the families. We might also call these a mortuary. We often see this in movies. If people are worried that someone has died, they might call the morgue and say, have they brought in the body of an old man or something? The morgue being the place where the police would bring a body after they find it somewhere around the city.
So there's this poor girl in a morgue, a mortuary, and nobody knows who she is. If you've been drowned, it does affect the way you look. It changes your facial features. So they don't know her. There's no ID back in those days. So they just bring people in and say, look, does anybody know who this poor girl is? Do you recognize the clothes, the hair? Something about her face. That's what we're trying to do. We're declaring who or what something is. That's what you do when you identify them. If you were looking at a security camera, you might go, oh, who's that person? I recognize that one. I can identify them. They're the thief who stole the money from the store. So police are always looking to identify criminals, but you also need to identify dead people if there's nothing else that tells you who they are.
That's right. However, as the article says next, no one could recognize her. Maybe they took a picture, drew a picture, put it on some signs and asked people to come by. Do you know this person? No one could recognize her. Now, this verb to recognize is very similar to identify. If you can look at something and say, I know what that is. If it's a person, I know that person's name. If it's a thing, you know what that thing is. You might even know who it belongs to. But if you look at someone or meet someone you've never met before, then you will not recognize that person. Who is that person? I don't know. I've never met them before. Who is that person? Oh, I go to school with that guy. I recognize that person. I can identify that person. Here's our example sentence. Do you recognize that woman over there? She is looking at us, and I don't recognize her. I don't know her, but maybe you do. So were they able to find someone who could finally identify this girl?
Nobody seems to know who she is.
Sad.
But her story doesn't quite end there. We see that a worker at the morgue was moved by the young girl's face, okay? Something about how she looked, maybe she was kind of poor and hungry, maybe a little beautiful. He thought that's such a shame that this child has died. So he feels emotions. That's what we mean by moved. He was kind of, this is a sad time. This is meant something to me.
Yeah, I guess he didn't just want her to be another body that was never identified and just ended up going away. He wanted to remember her in some way. Of course, it's very sad when someone dies and we can't find anyone who loved them to take care of them. So what did he do? He ordered a cast to be made of it. This is of her face. He ordered a cast to be made of her face. And what is a cast? Well, this is something you might have done in art class, basically when you use plaster, something kind of like clay that we might use for pottery, and you form this around an object so that you get the shape of that object on the inside. We also use this word cast for that big white thing they might put on your arm when you break your arm. Now, it's a little different, but the material is basically the same. The time when you might come across a cast or see people doing it, scientists often do this when they want to preserve old dinosaur bones or old things they find in the earth. Those things can be very delicate. They can't sort of hold them and move them around and examine them. So they often make a cast, and that gives them the shape of the object without damaging the object. It's kind of like cutting and pasting something in the real world, I guess. And people, of course, have also done this for a long time through history, going back to at least the Roman times, of people's faces after they die. You have the shape of that person's face, and it can make a very lifelike mask. For example, a cast was made of Napoleon's face after he died, and I'm sure in Paris you can probably go and see it.
Okay, and we learned that the mask, so the mask they made from the cast, became popular and was copied many times. You just use the cast, make lots of different masks of it, and it becomes a thing. You know, we need a mask to be a poor, sad girl. Maybe use it in the theater, for costume parties, for art purposes. So it becomes pretty popular.
There you go. So this cast, this shape of this person's face was going around for a number of years, it says, because in the late 1950s, many years later, Norwegian toy maker Asmund Lerdahl was asked to produce a medical doll for practicing CPR on. Okay, so this is unrelated, but there's this person, I guess they make medical equipment, or they're kind of an artist as well, and then someone wanted a doll, a lifelike doll, for students, for nurses and student doctors and whatnot, to practice CPR on. as part of their medical training. Interesting. All right, so far today we've been talking about performing CPR, we've been talking about doctors and nurses, and all of these things are medical things. Something that's medical, this adjective, basically means it's involved with illness, with sickness, with hospitals, doctors, nurses, medicine. You notice that medicine, that stuff we take when we're sick, and medical are very similar words. So yeah, anything to do with hospitals, doctors, illness, something like that would be a medical issue or a medical thing, or someone who works in the medical profession probably works in a hospital or a clinic. For example, a stethoscope is a common piece of medical equipment. That, of course, is that thing that doctors and nurses often have. They put it in their ear, they hold that really cold piece against your skin to listen to your heart and to your lungs. It's a stethoscope, and as everyone would know, that is medical equipment. All right, so Asmund Lerdahl is being asked to create a CPR doll.
Yeah,
okay.
So he's going to make sure that it's got the right kind of features, life size, so people can practice, a chest that you can press down.
Right, it's got to be as real as possible.
But as we see, Lerdahl didn't know what kind of face to use for the doll. Got to have lips to breathe into, a nose to pinch, all that other stuff.
Right.
So you need something.
Exactly. It has to look as human as possible to get the students used to, doing this procedure, performing CPR on real people. So in the end, that's the Asmund Lerdahl, he decided to use the face of the Parisian girl for her calm expression. I guess her face, the cast of her face had been going around the art community. It was easy for him to get, and he thought that's a very calm expression, a calm looking face. It's better for the students if they feel calm, if the model or the dummy looks dumb, looks calm, so that's what he did in the end. So in the end, this phrase, we kind of are wrapping up a bunch of actions that came before. I did this, and then I did that, and after that I did this, and then in the end, I got home 20 minutes late or something. So it's basically telling us what happened at the end of all these different actions.
Okay, so he picked the face for this doll from this nameless Parisian girl. This Parisian girl, meaning someone from Paris, that's what Parisian means, because of her calm expression. The expression is how somebody's face looks, normally in a way that shows what their thoughts or feelings are. They might have an angry expression. You won't be able to see all of mine. Angry expression. A sad expression, some tears, a happy expression with a big smile. This girl had a calm expression, which is good for this kind of practice. You don't want to practice CPR on a doll with a strange grin or an odd smile or something like that.
Right, that'd be strange. Yes.
So here's an example for expression. Did you see the expression on Lonnie's face when we all jumped out and yelled happy birthday?
Wow.
She was surprised and happy.
Absolutely.
You could tell from her face, from her expression.
Some shock, some surprise, and then some happiness when she realizes it's a big party. There you go. And her face, back to Resusci Ann, the face of this girl who died sadly in the river, her face has been used ever since. Not just on the dolls made by Lerdahl, but on CPR dolls all around the world. It's the face of that girl. That's a fascinating story. So her face has been used ever since. From that time, moving forward into the future, right up to our time. For example, the motor car was invented 150 years ago or so, and it's been the most common form of transportation ever since. We've had other things come along, airplanes, bicycles, whatnot, but from that time when it was invented to now, cars carry a lot of people around the world. So there you go. And Resusci Ann has educated a lot of doctors and nurses, paramedics, other medical people in general around the world ever since. That's good. Okay. I like that story.
And that takes us to the end of our article. So now let's go to our For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
So the question is, have you ever used a Resusci Ann in real life? And if not, would you like to?
That's interesting. I think I've seen them so many times,
Right.
maybe in pictures and film and things like that. I kind of think I have, but no, I don't think I actually have. In fact, I think when we learned CPR, we did it on other people, which is not a good idea.
I was going to say, is that safe?
I don't think it's safe, but this is, we were young and the local swimming pool didn't have one of these special dolls. Maybe they cost a bit. But I think if you learned it today, if you learned CPR properly today, most places you'd do a resuscitation. So maybe I should go back. I should go back, relearn what I learned many years ago, and practice with the doll. How about you? Have you ever used one?
I think I have at some point. I was considering becoming a doctor when I was about to finish high school.
Right, your father's a doctor.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I went on a 4-day kind of taster course to see what it would be like to study medicine at university. And we did some lectures and we did some activities and we did kind of this is an ER kind of simulation, an emergency room.
Wow.
And I think we had some of these dolls in there, if I remember rightly, to use on. And I think even as a kid, I remember there being this kind of doll and everybody, there's going to be a CPR class tomorrow and you're going to have to kiss the doll. And the way that kids do, and making fun of that kind of thing. So yes, I have, I'm pretty sure, used a resuscitation at some point for some kind of activity like that.
Very interesting.
All right, that brings us to the end of today's lesson. Thank you for joining us for it. We'll see you again soon for English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Bye. Vocabulary Review.
Perform. The doctor needs to rest well tonight because she'll perform an operation on a patient tomorrow. Drowned. A boy was found drowned yesterday. Sadly, he wasn't wearing a life jacket. Recognize. Lucy didn't know the man's name, but she recognized his face. She was sure she'd seen him before. Cast. This toy can no longer be made because the casts that are used to shape the plastic pieces were lost. Medical. Larry isn't a medical doctor, so he won't cure you. He's a doctor of musical arts. Expression. Jane didn't say anything, but I knew she was happy by the expression on her face.
智慧小补帖
Morgue. Identify.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net